Welcome to the League of Women Voters Dane County Forum on Dane County immigration issues. I'm Gail Bliss, your moderator this evening. And as we get started, I'll read the land acknowledgement. Next slide, please. League formation began more than a century ago in 1920 with the women's suffrage. But nearly 2 centuries ago, even prior to the 1848 creation of the state of Wisconsin, an 1832 treaty forced the Ho-Chunk to cede their territory of Tejo, 4 lakes. Both the federal and state governments repeatedly and unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connections across barriers of heritage and difference. We continue this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. In Dane County, we are all standing on the stolen ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk people. We pay respect to their elders, past, present, and future. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here today. The League of Women Voters of Dane County is grateful for the past, present, and future guidance of Wisconsin's Native nations. Next slide, please. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization. We do not endorse candidates, but we do take positions after appropriate study on issues of importance. The League of Women Voters' positions on immigration are on the screen now. They were written in 2008. The full version is in the resource guide. The League supports due process for all immigrants, believes that immigration policies should promote reunification of families, align with the economic, business, and employment needs of the United States, and be responsive to those facing political persecution or humanitarian crisis. The League supports reasonable provisions for unauthorized immigrants already in the country to earn legal status. Before I introduce our speakers, there are some items we need to cover. If you have a question, please write it on the note cards provided. For those of you joining us on Zoom, you may send your questions in the chat to the Zoom host. There will be volunteers collecting the questions toward the end of each presentation. Next slide. If you wish to further your exploration of immigration issues, we will have a discussion related to this forum on Zoom on Thursday, September 11th at 7 p.m. There are handouts at the door when you arrived, and there will be information tables in the atrium after the forum. The resource guide online is available for all. This month's book discussion is Everyone Who Is Gone Is Here by Jonathan Blitzen. Meetings are Thursday, the 18th of September and Saturday, the 20th, also on Zoom. We have an announcement from the State League that didn't make it into the PowerPoint. At 7 p.m. on Thursday, September 18th, there will be a webinar, Wisconsin's Constitutional Amendments, Consequences and Better Practices. Go to the events calendar on the my.lwv.org/Wisconsin website for more information. And the League of Women Voters Dane County Forum on Healthcare, Affordability, Access, and Coverage will be November 4th. Now I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Christine Newman-Ortez is the founding executive director of Voces de la Frontera and Voces de la Frontera Action, and is recognized as a national leader in the immigrants' rights movement. She serves on the board of the Fair Immigration Reform Movement, a national coalition of 47 grassroots organizations in 35 states, working together to fight for immigrant rights at the local, state, and federal levels. She has received many awards, being recognized nationally by the Center for Community Change, the National Education Association, USA Today, and the Huffington Post, among others. Please welcome Ms. Newman-Ortez to get us started with some immigration basics.
Such a pleasure to be here with all of you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. I'm not going to do there because I am short. And yeah, just so grateful to be here because obviously we're at a very difficult time in this country, and it's important to have these spaces to understand and process and reflect about all the changes and how we move forward. I was asked for this presentation to really just focus on some of just some basics around immigration. And for me, I think it's very important to understand immigration as fundamentally a class issue that's part of a global and national worker rights movement. There was a song written by one of our members, You Have to Cross the River, and he wrote in this song, for the rich, a passport, for the poor, a tire in the river. And I think that really captures a lot of the reality. Indeed, a visa already exists for wealthy investors who invest $1 million in the United States. And Trump is suggesting creating a Trump golden card for anyone who can simply buy it for $5 million. Trump and Stephen Miller's campaign of terror against immigrant communities has resulted in the legalization of racial profiling, which just recently happened with the Supreme Court decision taking up the treatment following the LA, in the context of the LA raids, and harassment and physical violence by masked unidentified agents, deporting essential workers and separating families. Instead, we need policies that build communities that are safe, collectively prosperous, and protect our rights at a time when the campaign of terror against immigrants is being waged as a tool to attack the judiciary, silence dissent, and violate human rights and due process. As was mentioned at the opening, it's important to really start the conversation on immigration, recognizing that Wisconsin and the United States were created through the forced displacement of indigenous people from their lands by European settlers. It includes a shameful legacy of broken treaties, systematic efforts to destroy their culture and family, the struggle to recognize indigenous civil rights and dual citizenship rights, and ongoing struggles over land and resources that exist to this day. For most of U.S. history through the 1800s, migration to the U.S. was straightforward and promoted business interests to settle and work the land and engage in commerce. Over time, there was a nativist movement that started to exclude certain groups, such as the Chinese Exclusion Act and restrictions on Japanese migration. Racial discrimination later extended to Southern and Eastern Europeans, such as the Polish, the Irish, Italians, Jews, Greeks, who were also considered an inferior race. 1965 was a moment of progress in our immigration system, as it abolished explicit visa restrictions based on the idea of racial superiority. One of the explicit goals of the current administration is to eliminate this legacy, which has ushered in greater diversity to the United States. For nearly 150 years since the time of statehood, Wisconsin's foreign-born population was predominantly people born in Europe. Large migration streams arrived in Wisconsin from Germany, Ireland, Poland, and Northern Europe. Other waves included Russians, Slovaks, and Czech. While the Black community was brought forcibly through the abhorrent institution of slavery, internal migration from the South to Wisconsin occurred for the same reasons: escaping persecution and seeking better job opportunities in urban, industrialized areas. And this is especially true after World War II. Since the 1990s, there has been a significant growth of the immigrant population moving to Wisconsin, especially from Asia and Latin America. The foreign-born population from Asia mainly consists of Hmong refugees, the third largest in the country, people from China, India, and the Philippines as the largest groups. The Latin American foreign-born population has consisted primarily of people born in Mexico who were recruited to work in agricultural and industrial jobs. The second largest Latin American group, though not immigrant because they're US citizens, is the Puerto Rican community that arrived in the 1940s. In more recent years, global unrest has driven more people to the US. There has been an increase in Central American and South American immigrants, including Venezuela, Colombia, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Cuba, who received protection from deportation under the Biden administration because of pressure from the immigrant and refugee rights movement. About 308,000 immigrants now call Wisconsin home and are an essential part of our workforce and our communities. This is approximately 5.2% of the population, or roughly 1 in 20 people in Wisconsin. In 2023, immigrants paid $3.5 billion in taxes in Wisconsin and $10.1 billion in immigrant spending. Immigrants are defined as people who are foreign-born and include people who became naturalized U.S. citizens, are authorized to come to the U.S. through visas such as work visas, student visas, humanitarian visas, family visas, or undocumented residents. Some undocumented workers have protections against deportations, but are still vulnerable. Temporary protected status, asylum seekers, refugees, DACA recipients, deferred action for labor enforcement recipients, victims of violence that include the U visa, the trafficking visa, violence against women visas, are examples of this. One Wisconsin case that made national attention is Yesenia Ruano that really illustrates this. She came from El Salvador, fleeing cartels, asking for asylum, and though she wasn't able to move forward with that, she did have, and still does, have a pending trafficking visa. And when the current administration took away enforcement priorities, which meant, anyone who was undocumented was deportable, regardless of someone like Yesenia, who had, moved to the United States 11 years ago, has U.S. citizen children, has been a bilingual paraprofessional, is loved by her students, her workers, the community, is an essential worker because we need bilingual teachers. Despite all that, and strong resistance in the community, solidarity, she basically had to self-deport or was told they would deport her. And, but it really, her willingness to come forward was important to illustrate, right, to challenge this frame that they put of who exactly, right, is being hurt by these policies. The major problem in our immigration system has for many decades been a lack of legal channels. Despite 1965 eliminating explicit racist criteria per country, the number of visas that is available has led to huge backlogs and is out of sync with our economic and family needs. This is most obviously the case with migration from countries that are closest to us, like Mexico. For example, one of our members had to wait 16 years before her sister's petition finally arrived. And for those 16 years, she was at risk of deportation as well as her husband. An example of the shortage of work visas would be the dairy industry, where 70% are undocumented, a pillar of Wisconsin's economy. Yet dairy farmers, cannot get visas for year-round workers who are essential to the well-being of our economy. And it's not just that, but the system has been broken in a myriad of ways by Congress over the years, intentionally creating a more vulnerable workforce. One example is that it's called a re-entry charge, and that means that you left the country, you tried to come back, you were stopped, so deported, and then came back, but that shows up in the system. And that in and of itself, and it often happens with people going back to see a family member who is sick, and even if that was 15, 20 years ago, that is considered a criminal charge, a felony, and it makes legalization a barrier for many cases, including like U.S. citizen spouses, and also makes it faster to deport you. Additionally, individuals who face obstacles, many individuals, are adult U.S. citizen children of undocumented parents where they don't have a sibling or a parent that has status and who came into this country without a legal visa, because many people can enter and overstay, or entered in some way legally and overstayed, and that is a huge barrier where people, even though they have a family member, are not able to get petitioned. And in Wisconsin, there's an estimated 28,000 of mixed immigration status families. And nationally, over 10 million live with a family member who has some kind of legal status. So why is it that there has been no solution to this problem? I would say there's 4 key things. The first is that the debate over immigration reform has pitted the interests of large corporations against immigrant and worker rights movement. An example of this are proposals to tie work visas to an employer, which would give an employer even more control over a worker as it stands right now. And eliminating our family-based immigration system altogether. And I think you would all agree with me that you should not, it shouldn't just be the wealthy people that have a right to work and be with their families. All people should have that right. And as well as, a lack of worker rights protections. Most recently, the Dignity Act has been brought by an alliance of corporations who are, feeling the heat as we see raids go on in workplaces like meatpacking plants, fields, the Hyundai manufacturing plant in Georgia. And this Dignity Act is an example of something that doesn't make sense. It's unrealistic. The cost is $7,000. If you were to get it, it expands E-Verify, a very problematic system, and it harms others in the process. It's and for the immigrant rights movement, there's really an understanding that we want a bill that's we don't mind if it's not everything you want, but something that moves us forward, but not at the expense of others. And that's like a guiding principle. The other thing would be, the second thing is the private prison industry and the military industry benefit economically from a criminalized population and a militarized border. 90% of detainees are in for-profit detention facilities. Can someone tell me what you think legally they pay a worker? They call it voluntary, but if you're in detention, you often have to pay for things. And so you can work. How much do people think these federal detention facilities pay workers for janitorial services, cleaning? What is it? Close. It's $1 a day. So what does that say about our future, right? Working class standards, right? When you have basically, near slavery conditions, right? If that's the situation. Obviously, there's been some challenges to that, but that's what it is. And under this environment, as that works its way up, there's been some challenges in a few states. But that shows you the exploitation, just a gross level of exploitation and economic interest. The third thing is a white nationalist movement, similar to past movements in U.S. history, that also believed in this false science of eugenics and believe in authoritarianism. And, those folks in that ideology are now in power. And the fourth is that for both political parties have really been aligned in a way that is divisive and ill-informed on the question of asylum seekers and refugees in recent years. I'm going even back to Obama, I would say, and certainly with Biden and Trump. And that and the failure to pass immigration reform for undocumented immigrants with mixed immigration status families really created a deep cynicism with people who've been in the immigrant rights movement for many years about the entire political system delivering. We already know people were dissatisfied with the political system delivering on economic issues. And also leads to divisions, right? Where this idea of, well, you're taking from me, and things like that. So immigrant against immigrant in terms of the border, right? Dealing with more people coming in, even though we need more people coming in and people to do the work and care for an aging community. What is needed? We need an immigration reform that is broad, simple, affordable, and does not cause harm to others. At the state level, we need driver's license restoration. There's a state of bills called Keeping Families Together that was recently introduced that includes accountability with ICE so that if they come to Wisconsin, they can't be wearing masks, not identifying themselves. One of the bills also really emphasizes the judicial warrant standard so that local law enforcement cannot go into these partnerships or ICE in public spaces without having a judicial warrant. And that judicial warrant just basically means that you are going after a specific person because a judge signed it, there was evidence that a crime of a serious nature was conducted, not just, what you look like or, or just administrative warrants, which is basically them, authorizing their own activities. Or programs like SCAP. Both of those programs were defeated here in Dane County because of the attention, the transparency that was brought to it. So that's a very good thing. Most recently, we see that there's been a drag on the economy for a couple of key issues. One is the attack on the immigrant community, which is an essential part of the workforce in many ways. And also the tariff war, as well as the gutting of federal employees and programs and the general uncertainty about the future. This, in addition to the big betrayal bill, which is going to be making massive cuts to healthcare and education and putting a ton of money into escalating the attacks on immigrants to pay for, so the cuts on healthcare and education are going to pay for this escalated attack on immigrants and for tax breaks for billionaires. It's only going to make the situation much more worse. And frankly, it does create a organizing opportunity to link struggles together. And I think the current administration is counting on the strategy of divide and conquer. And that's why it's so good that all of you are here today, because it's very important that we link those struggles and that we stand in solidarity with one another against rising authoritarianism. The other thing that's good news is that there's been recent polls done by the Gallup that actually show that as people are witnessing what's unfolding, that there is increased support for immigration reform, and opposition to mass deportation policy. So the study found that 79% of Americans believe immigration is a good thing for the country, a record high, while the percentage wanting to decrease immigration dropped to 30% from 55% a year ago. And while the greatest movement is with Democrats and independents, it also does extend to Republicans. So we need to educate and hold our elected officials accountable in this period for the changes we need. We need to be participating in protest actions and fighting at the local level to see how we can expand protections, these kind of that hold up these due process rights that have been effective in beating back what we're seeing with the raids in other parts of the country. Voces de la Frontera, in partnership with like Dane County, the Immigration Council, the Silk and Centro, has in Dane County, but also has a community defense network, participating in solidarity actions, whether that's court accompaniment or marches, and mutual aid, which is legal defense fund, which we created. We are also organizing a statewide tour in forums similar to this to really talk about immigration and the policies that we need, in particular, focusing on really holding our sheriffs accountable and local law enforcement to not entering into these agreements where they basically become an arm of immigration. Since the beginning of the year, there were 6 this year. There are now 16 agreements and 22 agreements where they're sharing information. So it's quickly growing behind closed doors. They're getting a lot of money in exchange. And we're seeing that there is success in community pushback in counties like Walworth County, in Clark County, in Kewaunee County, very conservative areas too, where coalitions have come together, community members, to say, we don't want this in our community. And so having those conversations is very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Our second speaker is Professor Armando Ibarra. He is the Vilas Distinguished Achievement Professor in the School for Workers, Department of Labor Education at UW-Madison. He holds a joint appointment in Chicana and Latina Studies. He earned his PhD in political science from the University of California at Irvine and joined the UW in 2011. His research and fields of specialization are political economy, working in communities of Latin American descent in the U.S., international labor migration, social movements, community development, community-based participatory, applied, and action research. Please welcome Professor Ibarra to address immigrant contributions to the economy in Dane County and Wisconsin.
Buenas tardes. Good evening. It's such a pleasure to be here. At first, I just wanted to acknowledge that that I am amongst 2 people that I deeply admire and respect for their professionalism, their leadership, and also their principled stances. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I am going to talk about immigration in Wisconsin and specifically here in Dane County as well. Not in abstract terms, but in ways that touch our economy, our schools, our workplaces, and our communities. So immigration is not one story. It is many stories. People come here for different reasons. Some flee war or violence, some are recruited for jobs, some come to reunite with family, and others make a personal choice to seek new opportunities. Immigrants also arrive with different legal statuses. Some are lawful permanent residents, some are refugees or asylees, some come on temporary work permits, some are visa overstayers, and some are undocumented. Many of the eligible green card holders eventually naturalize and become U.S. citizens. Here in Wisconsin, the largest origins are from Latin America and Asia, but we also have significant communities from Europe and Africa. Immigrant is a part of our state's demographic fabric. There are many myths about immigration, and they have been around for generations. I looked through my files and found information on myths that date back at least 20 years, when I was a graduate student and I was interested in this field of study, and used some of that information to create the table you see on the screen. I can say that they have not changed much. Many of these myths are at least 100 years old. One common myth is that immigrants drain resources or undermine national identity. The reality is quite different. Immigrants work, they pay taxes, they start businesses, they volunteer in their communities, they raise families and become part of the civic fabric. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine in a 2017 study confirmed that immigration brings broadly positive contributions to both the economy and society. These myths often ignore the data and the lived experience of immigrant families. Instead of threatening who we are, they strengthen America's long tradition of renewal through migration. Let's look at the numbers. In Wisconsin, there's about 307,000 people who are immigrants, just over 5% of the state's population. Almost half of this population are naturalized U.S. citizens. About 75,000 are undocumented. This is based on national and state level estimates. In Dane County, the share is even higher. Nearly 49,000 immigrants, close to 10% of the total population. So 1 in 10 people in our county was born in another country. Just over half of this population in Dane County are naturalized citizens. We estimate that about 11,000 are undocumented, though the exact number is hard to capture because immigrant populations are consistently undercounted. Those numbers remind us that immigration is not marginal, and in fact, it's central to our societal well-being and a permanent feature of Wisconsin's communities. Immigrants are also central to our workforce. Statewide, about 218,000 immigrant workers make up 7% of the labor force. Their labor force participation, meaning the percentage of adults working or actively seeking work, is around 73%, noticeably higher than U.S. workers at 65%, U.S.-born workers. In Dane County, immigrants make up about 10% of the labor force as well, in similar participation rates. This shows us that immigrants are not on the sidelines. They are right at the center of economic activity, often working harder and longer to sustain themselves and their families. The economic contributions of immigrants are enormous. In Wisconsin, immigrant households pay over $2.2 billion in federal taxes and $1.2 billion in state and local taxes every year. After taxes, they still hold more than $10 billion in spending power. This is money that flows directly into our communities. In Dane County, immigrants contribute nearly $250 million in federal taxes, over $120 million in state and local taxes, and more than $1 billion in spending power. Add to this the fact that immigrants own homes, build businesses, and stabilize neighborhoods. There are over 12,000 immigrant entrepreneurs in Wisconsin and tens of thousands of immigrant homeowners. These are people building futures not just for themselves, but for the entirety of our state. Immigrants are also sustaining entire industries. In STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, nearly 1 in 10 workers is foreign-born. In some regions of the state, that share is closer to 16%, meaning that 16 out of every 100 workers in some places in our state make up the STEM field. In agriculture, immigrant workers are essential. Roughly 11% of the workforce is foreign-born, and Wisconsin's $50 billion dairy industry could not survive without them. Let's be clear, in my humble estimation, this estimate of farm workers in Wisconsin is vastly off, but these are the official numbers that we get. In healthcare, more than a quarter of our doctors and 1/5 of surgeons are immigrants. Nurses have grown by nearly 50% since 2010. In manufacturing and food processing, immigrants make up 9% of the workforce and nearly 1 in 5 workers in food production. And in construction, about 14% of workers nationally are undocumented immigrants, helping sustain our housing and infrastructure capacity. Now let's take a closer look at the dairy industry. Wisconsin is proud to be America's dairyland, but that identity rests on the backs of immigrant workers, most of them undocumented. Our 2023 study shows they make up about 70% of on-farm dairy labor. These are grueling jobs, long hours, limited labor protections, exposure to risk, and yet they are the reason the industry not only survives, but actually thrives. When we talk about protecting Wisconsin's dairy heritage, we also need to talk about protecting the dignity and rights of workers who make it possible. Immigrants are not only workers, they are also citizens and community leaders. Nearly half of Wisconsin's immigrants are naturalized U.S. citizens. In Dane County, more than half are citizens. There is a higher percentage of naturalized immigrant citizens in Dane County than the state as a whole. Immigrant communities are leading through organizations like Voces de la Frontera, the Community Immigration Law Center, Centro Hispano, and the Latino Academy of Workforce Development, building bridges, training leaders, and expanding integration and civic participation of these communities. Immigration is also about the next generation. There is an estimated 16,000 immigrant students in Wisconsin's K-12 public schools. Nearly 55,000 English learner students are served across the state, speaking more than 140 languages. Spanish is the largest, followed by Hmong. And between 2010 and 2040, it is estimated that about 43,000 U.S.-born children in Wisconsin lived with at least one undocumented family member, these mixed status families. That means that immigration policy decisions don't just affect immigrants, they affect Wisconsin kids, classrooms, and communities. So why does this all matter? We ask ourselves often, why does this even matter? Well, because immigrants are not temporary visitors. They are a permanent part of our history, our present, and our future. They strengthen the economy, enrich culture, and help grow our population at a time when Wisconsin desperately needs it. They are not outsiders. They are stakeholders in our shared future. And what can you do? We often say, what can we do? We are doing. Right? First, learn. Keep asking questions and sharing facts. Second, support inclusive, evidence-based policies that recognize immigrants as neighbors, not strangers. And third, get involved. Organizations like Centro, Voces, Silk are all doing vital work and are always looking for allies. And in closing, immigration is not an abstract issue. It is the story of families, workers, students, and people who are part of Wisconsin today. It is the story of our shared future. Thank you for your time, your commitment to civic life, and your willingness to engage in this conversation. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Professor Ibarra. Our final speaker this evening is Aisa Olivares, the Managing Attorney for the Community Immigration Law Center, CILC, which is pronounced Silk. She's also a junior partner at Eastbridge Law Group in Madison. She represents clients in removal proceedings, bond proceedings, and appeals. She advises clients on their rights and does presentations on immigrant rights. During law school at UW-Madison, she participated in the Immigrant Justice Clinic and received many awards for her work. She was honored by the Children's Justice Project Fellowship and many other awards. After graduation in 2016, Ms. Olivares returned to her native Texas to represent unaccompanied minor children who were placed in removal proceedings by the Department of Homeland Security. In 2018, after returning to Wisconsin to work with Silk, she received the Belle Case La Follette Award from the Wisconsin Law Foundation for her work with underserved communities. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Olivares.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for having me. As Armando said, honored to be alongside both of you and speaking on these issues at such a critical time in history in the state of Wisconsin, definitely. So I come from a practitioner base, so I'm an immigration attorney. I practice immigration law, and so a lot of what I'll be sharing today is from that perspective. And so we can jump 2 slides because the next one is a legal disclaimer because I had to include it. So I was entrusted with discussing the rights and legal protections for immigrants nationally, and so I'll discuss the basis for immigration law through the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. I'll talk about some of the constitutional protections for immigrants here in the United States. I'll also discuss asylum as a right under international and United States-based law. And then I'll talk a little bit about some benefits that vary by state, even though they're not rights. As we were, discussing earlier, different state policies influence the way that people live here in the state and what they can access and what their futures look like. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So we can jump to the next slide. This just talks about silk services, but there's information on the outside as well, so that you can look at that. But we'll look at the numbers in the next slide. So we know, right, we've talked a lot about numbers, 41 million people, million immigrants in the United States. And because my focus in my practice is deportation defense, 83% of people deported from the United States were not given a hearing before a judge. And I'll talk more about how that comes into our constitutional protections. And the United States spends $1.84 billion detaining people who are immigrants in the United States. So a lot of money going toward violating constitutional protections and due process. And the root of the work that I do is guided on the next slide by the Immigration and Nationality Act. And so I spoke recently to a group of middle schoolers, and they're like, what do you do? And the easiest way that I could explain it is when you move to a new place, like a new city or a new home, a new school, there's someone there to guide you, to let you know how to navigate, to settle, and get to know the community. And so that's what I think my job is as an immigration lawyer, instructing people on what is the law, how can they stay here safely, and keep families reunited here in the United States. And so that statute that governs that ability to enter the United States and leave the United States is governed by the Immigration and Nationality Act. And so that's on the next slide. And that primary statute is under, it's codified under Title 8 of the US Code, and it is something that I have to follow as an immigration lawyer. And it's what has developed over time in regulations for us to be able to allow people to enter the United States. It controls in different interpretations of the law and what constitutes different areas to be able to enter again and leave the United States under deportation. I think what people are most interested right now and what we're seeing a lot of violations of is on the next slide, the constitutional protections. And so the fundamental constitutional protections of due process and equal protection under the Constitution and of the Bill of Rights apply to every person regardless of immigration status. And so when we read citizen in those places, we're not talking about US citizens, we're talking about a citizen, right? Somebody who lives here amongst us, our neighbors, each other, right? So regardless of immigration status, everyone is granted certain rights and protections under the Constitution. The first one being the right to due process. Okay, so that's making sure that there is a fair hearing, a fair process for you to follow, that you're able to introduce evidence, that you're able to be a witness in your proceedings or bring witnesses to your proceedings. And of course, right now, it's something that we are seeing violated at a very high level. And so expedited removal is something that was expanded in January of 2025 to include not only removal without being able to see an immigration judge for those people encountered within 100 miles of the border, but to the interior of the United States as well. And so what that means is that people are being detained and removed without the ability to contest that removal. without judicial review of that removal. And we're seeing it at very, very high levels right now. We're seeing it in our immigration courts, which for us here is Chicago. People's cases being dismissed and then being immediately arrested and removed without the opportunity for this judicial review. So due process is a right under the law, under the Constitution for us all, regardless of immigration status. And one way that due process can get really complicated is because of number 2. So we have the right to legal representation. All of us do. But in immigration court, where you have to defend yourself against deportation, you have the right to a lawyer, but not the right to a government-funded lawyer if you cannot afford one. So what that means is, what is due process if you don't understand what the parameters, what you're arguing, what your rights are in that proceeding? And so it's not like in criminal law where we have the Sixth Amendment protection to being afforded a lawyer, right? We have the Gideon decision where if you're at risk of serving jail time, you'll get a public defender. That doesn't exist in immigration court, regardless of the high stakes that exist if I am deported, which is permanent exile from my home, separation of family, and possibly death upon return to my home country. And so one thing that exists right now that I, with the Community Immigration Law Center, have been supporting is the Fairness to Freedom Act, which is currently pending right now. We've done a lot of advocacy at the federal level, and Congressman Mark Pocan has supported this Fairness to Freedom Act, which actually would provide the right to people at risk of deportation to have a legal representative with them in the courtroom. Unfortunately, we're in a place right now where we're not sure where that's going to go, but please look up the legislation, support the legislation. We are going to continue to push at the federal level for this right to representation in immigration court. And the reason that we do that, the statistics behind it, are that people have a 10.5 chance, more likelihood, 10 times more likely to be successful in staying in the United States in a deportation hearing if you're represented by a lawyer, right? Because when you go into an immigration courtroom, and you'll see a picture of one in a little bit, it sort of looks like your typical courtroom. There is a judge, there is a prosecutor that represents the governor, the government, the Department of Homeland Security, or ICE, and then someone sits at counsel table. If they're not represented, unfortunately, they will have to go up against a well-resourced government attorney to defend themselves against deportation. Right now, there's about 60,000 people in detention nationally. Unprecedented numbers in terms of detention. In 1996, we only had 9,000 people detained nationally. And one is too many, I'll say. But 60,000 is absolutely unprecedented. Only 30% of those people are represented by a lawyer. And again, the stakes are even higher, right? When I'm in detention, it's harder to get a hold of an attorney. Many of the facilities are in remote or rural areas. And it can be really hard to schedule a phone call. I had to schedule a phone call today with someone in Campbell County in Kentucky. And they told me, oh, you have to pay for this phone call to speak with this person. I'm like, he has the right to speak with an attorney. And I want it unrecorded, right? But it's not happening everywhere. And it's because of this fast expansion of detention facilities across the nation, including in Wisconsin, with local jails that just don't know how to navigate the increase in bed space and the fact that people are calling from all over the United States to speak to someone in that facility. So, like right to legal representation, right, support the Fairness to Freedom Act for the universal representation, and you can look through that up through the Vera Institute of Justice or the National Partnership for New Americans. And the third one is the right against unreasonable search and seizure. And so, you know, that is under the Fourth Amendment. There are exceptions at the border. I was born on the border, right? So I know that I have to go through a checkpoint every time that I leave my region of the United States and asked if I'm a US citizen before I can pass. If you're stopped there, there's some iffy things that could happen. It's sort of like a black hole in what your legal protections are when you're stopped at the border or at these checkpoints within 100 miles of the border. But it's why when we talk to people about what their rights are, we train them to know what a judicial warrant looks like and why ICE cannot enter their home without a judicial warrant because of this constitutional protection. The fourth one here is the right to not be arrested or detained without a valid reason. We all know what just happened with the Supreme Court on Monday, right? We train people with their rights to ask, am I free to go? Right? Because there has to be a valid reason that you are being held. There has to be probable cause or a reasonable suspicion, which is a little bit lower than probable cause. But we know now, based on what the Supreme Court decided on Monday, right, these specific articulable facts to decide whether to detain someone can be something as simple as their skin color. Where they're being found. Are they on the grounds at Home Depot? Right? Are they working in the fields? Those are facts that can create this reasonable suspicion for detention now. And so it puts a lot of people at risk. It means that the raids in LA can continue. It means that detention is going to continue to explode, and these private detention facilities are going to continue to make money because of this Supreme Court decision. And lastly, we have the right to record interactions with law enforcement. And that is a right that we have. We can record interactions, even though often they shout that you shouldn't take pictures or you shouldn't record. If you're doing so from a public space, that is a right that people have, regardless, again, of their immigration status. And as you all have seen through social media, etc., many people have been able to record these interactions to be able to share with the public so that we know more about how ICE is functioning, but also with their attorneys so that we can see and also sue the government for the way that people are being arrested during this time. And so outside of that, on the rest of the slides, I just share what our rights are when we are interacting with immigration and customs enforcement. And I got these slides from Clinic. They are a national organization that supports education of people and their rights and sharing a lot of really great resources. And so I won't go through all of them very specifically because I did share the slides with everybody, but these are slides and information that you can share with people in the community, right? We have the biggest protection against, right, a reasonable search and seizure in our home, right? Our home is a place that we are protected. It cannot be entered without a judicial warrant. This judicial warrant should be very specific about the address that they're entering, why they're entering, who they're looking for, what they're looking for. Otherwise, the door should not be opened because then it is an invitation inside of the home and it's sort of a waiver of that right. And what we train people to know is that this judicial warrant, what it looks like, and knowing that just because there is a warrant that exists, it's not necessarily a judicial warrant, or the right to enter your home. And so training people to understand what does it look like so that they can exercise that constitutional right in the case that ICE is at people's homes. Currently, the way that we're seeing detention happen most often here in Wisconsin is this jail to Dodge County Jail facility, the detention facility pipeline. So negative law enforcement contact, it happens. You are booked into the jail, whether it's for, driving without a license. Maybe you didn't have your license on you, and so you're booked into the jail so that they can figure out your identity. That is resulting in detainers. And it's resulting in people getting booked into a system so that ICE now has knowledge of where they are, and then they are transferred to the Dodge County facility. The Dodge County facility is in Juneau, Wisconsin. I was just there on Sunday and have been there very often. It's in a very rural area. There's a Piggly Wiggly and a Subway. So very small, but it has 200 beds for people, and they get paid by the day if those beds are full. But expansion is happening. We know that Sauk County, Brown County, Douglas County are starting to hold people for ICE for more than 2 or 3 days. They're holding them for 3, 4, 5, 15 days before they're transferred to another ICE facility. And so this expansion has resulted in adding to this unprecedented national number of people being detained. And these new contracts that sheriffs are making with the federal government are putting our communities at risk. And it's also skewing, right, public safety, right? Well, if they're focusing on federal enforcement, what are they doing about local enforcement, and who are they protecting? So call your local sheriff. Although the Dane County Sheriff did pull for BESCAP funding, which was huge. So the rest of these slides talk about protections in home, and then it goes through protections in the street or public area as well as within your car, and what that looks like. So I'm not going to go through all of those specifically because I could be here all day, but I did want to include them because they are important. They go toward all of those constitutional rights that I listed earlier. This is the way that we explain it in practice, right, to people. And we can never control what our constitutional rights are going to play out like. Right, we see what happened on Monday, so it's always going to play out differently, but there is a way that people can stand up for themselves, stand up for their neighbors, and so I wanted to include that information. If we'll go to the slide, the fight for asylum rights, that would be awesome. So I wanted to include this because even though this is not something that is, the fight for asylum is very close and dear to my heart. I grew up on the border and worked a lot with Catholic Charities on the border and assisting asylum seekers in finding refuge and connecting them with legal representation on the border. And, under international law and under the Refugee Act of 1980 here in the United States, asylum is a right. And asylees differ from refugees. Refugees actually prove their past persecution or their well-founded fear abroad, and then they're brought to the United States after having already proved that. Asylum seekers have to actually be in the United States to seek that right and to prove that case. And most often it happens in our immigration courts. Because when you come to the border, you're placed in a removal proceeding. And so on the next slide, I'll show the numbers. We have unprecedented global migration right now. More than 117.3 million individuals are displaced worldwide. And this accounts for the increase in numbers that we saw of asylum seekers at our southern border. Through the Community Immigration Law Center, for years we were providing asylum orientations to the community and helping people prepare their asylum applications. And I can tell you that our wait list was years long until this year. We have maybe 3 people waiting for our help. And it's because the right to seek asylum at our southern border has essentially been shut off. People are no longer able to present themselves to seek this right, and many policies for current asylum seekers, policies by this administration, actually threaten whether they'll be successful with their asylum claim. So on the next slide, I'll show you for asylum, you have to show a fear of persecution of the government of your country, or somebody who will not control, or if the government doesn't want to or cannot control a certain private actor. This fear has to be on account of one of 5 categories: your race, religion, nationality, your political opinion, or your membership in a particular social group, which is vast and is actually under attack currently by the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is now saying that women and gender doesn't make a particular social group, which we are fighting up against, and also that family-based units no longer create a particular social group. So if my brother was murdered in home country, I can no longer show that basis, right, for asylum. And so the good thing is that we have good Seventh Circuit case law that helps us fight these cases locally, but nationally, it's a huge policy change that's going to really hurt many people. If we will go to, yep, we can go there. So not only do you have to show, past persecution, but you can also show fear of future persecution. That's the well-founded fear part. And that a lot goes into being able to show what could happen if I were to return to my home country. And then the next slide. Other types of protections here are withholding of removal, which allows people to seek asylum even if they've been here for more than 1 year in the United States, or if they've been deported in the past. The thing about withholding of removal currently is that people are being successful in immigration court, in detention, and are now subject to the possibility of being sent to a third country. Right, so we've seen a lot of people be successful from Nicaragua in these facilities because of the political strife. This is probably the only State Department report that was released this summer where the first sentence said, from Nicaragua, the situation in Nicaragua has gotten significantly worse since last year. And that was written by this administration. And so things are really, really bad. And people are being successful in being able to fight these claims, but then they're being sent to Mexico, right? They're not being sent back to Nicaragua. They have a protection from being sent to Nicaragua, but they're being sent to a third country, right? Where they have no family, no connections, right? No resources, instead of being able to stay here with their family. So another threat to the policy of asylum and protecting asylum seekers. If we could jump to the map of the immigration courts, I just want to show you all, since we did talk about the right to legal representation, all of the immigration courts in the United States. This is a map of them. Ours is in Chicago, Illinois. For the state of Wisconsin, we started the year with about 24 immigration judges in Chicago. There's 13 right now. This is with about a backlog of 1 million cases that are pending. And so we are seeing judges be pressured to move through proceedings quickly, to make decisions quickly, which impacts the constitutional right to due process. It impacts whether or not they're looking at these claims very carefully and whether we can present evidence. The other day, I asked the judge, specifically told her, I need more time. I want to be able to have this expert testify. And she's like, we don't have time for him to testify. I'm like, well, he's on my witness list, right? So an appealable issue, but it creates more work and more time for our clients to wait for there to be a decision in their case, because the judges have to move so quickly and make decisions very fast. And so imagine for people without lawyers, even more issues that should go up on appeal. I have a picture of the courtroom on the next slide. And so you'll see where the US flag is, that's where the judge sits. You see a screen on the far left, that's for people who are in detention. They usually appear virtually. And then you see council table and the government table there as well. So on the next slide, and I'll just finish up with, even though state level policies are not rights, are not written into the law, it really has a big impact on how people are living here in the United States and their ability to create a trajectory and a living for their families, like in-state tuition, like driver's license, like health care for immigrants. And so as Christine mentioned, Keeping Families Together bill, very important in pushing state level policy, pro-immigrant legislation forward in our state so that people feel welcomed, feel that they're in a place where they can make a home and they can thrive amongst this amazing community. So with that, I'll thank you and I will take questions.
Thank you very much. I'll try and be close enough to the mic that this mic works well enough that you can hear me. If you have questions, please hold them up so people can collect them. We'll start with the ones that got turned in a little early. How can we help keep immigrants safe? Both those we know, my friend is an immigrant, or the general population within Dane County. Who'd like to start with that one?
One of the things that VOSIS has done is create a community defense network that's been built out, here in Dane County, but statewide as well. And it really, one of the foundational pieces, I think, is for people to attend a Know Your Rights training. That's something that I should just covered some of those points, but that actually is really important for everybody to know, and those rights apply to everybody. And if someone is caught up in a situation, right, I think our recommendation is that everybody, let's say ICE comes in here and wants to check people's papers or targets brown people in this room, regardless of status, or whoever's, if someone intervenes and all that, like regardless of status, we would say, I'm not gonna speak to you without an attorney present, without consulting an attorney. So those kind of things where it's opportunities where like US citizens can be in solidarity with someone by having that, and obviously being able to share that information with others. So I think the Know Your Rights trainings, there also are the bilingual ICE operators, and we do have a system now that can translate. That's another way we're looking for people for that piece. And then the other one is these verifiers, so where we can document incidents that are happening. But I think also knowing where the resources are. I'll give you an example. Someone I know was I just recommended, hey, you should really go see an attorney to just see what your situation is like. And it was important because, she had paid someone who was not an attorney to file her paperwork. And as it turns out, she actually didn't qualify because of the reason I mentioned earlier. U.S. citizen children in and of itself was not enough, and it actually puts her up on the radar screen. So it's just important to know those things because if ICE comes, they're going to come to locations where, like we've just seen what the Supreme Court blessed. You're brown, speaking maybe not English or not well, and you're in an area that might be associated with immigrant workers, you're a target. So I think, knowing your rights and insisting on that. Otherwise, we're helping people expedite. And I think the lobbying piece is very, very important, being a voice. Sorry. And I was just saying that the lobbying piece, as you guys are doing a great job in this part of the state, but we also need help, in the surrounding areas of the state. And so anything that can be done like that, I guess that's how I would start.
Yeah, I want to echo sort of this ability to stand in solidarity with people by refusing to answer questions of ICE, refusing to share what your status is, because you have the right to remain silent. And I know my family is trained on what that looks like when we're in public. If there is, and you work in a place where there's a work site raid, oftentimes ICE will use the tactic of, okay, if you are a citizen, you stand over here, right? And it separates all of the people out, right? Refuse to move. Stay still. Stand your ground. You have the right? You have the right to remain silent, and that is sort of an admission. Even you're moving your body, right, is an admission of what that is. So I think that's one way. I echo the know your rights and sharing those with community members. When these trainings happen, they happen often through Voces and through Centro and Silk in our community very often. So attend them, know them, share them. It's going to be important for when we have large-scale enforcement, which it's not if, it's when it happens here in Wisconsin.
I just want to add a small piece to the conversation of how do we keep each other safe in this. We live our values, right? We create welcoming spaces. We hold our elected officials accountable. We make sure that our budgets are aligned with those values. And when I say budgets, I'm not talking about our personal budgets only, but also our county and our city budgets and our state budgets. And, you know, we uplift those organizations that are doing the work like Voces and Silk by not just volunteering, but by offering resources, right? Investing in these organizations, becoming sustaining members, and just being on top of what's going on through these trusted organizations in our communities.
A couple of quick questions for Aisa. Can private citizens record interaction with law enforcement when they're seeing something happen to somebody else? And do people representing themselves in court have translators when needed?
Great question. So yes, you can record as a private citizen what is occurring, any law enforcement interaction from a public space. You can also do it from a private space if it's your private space. For example, if it's inside of your home or you have permission from whoever the homeowner is or who, is in charge of the facility. But yes, you can do it from a private space. I one time had a question about whether you can do it from someone's driveway. There's a lot of case law on that in Wisconsin about whether a driveway is a private or public space. But just be careful, be mindful, know that even though you're doing something lawful, immigration is known to get in your face, try to block the recording. It's usually why multiple people are recording at one time. And the reason that these recordings are so important is because a lawyer can use these in the future if there was a violation of somebody's rights during that time, even if they are a citizen or a civilian, because there was some sort of violence that occurred during the arrest. So yes, from a public space, you have the right to record and take photographs. And in a legal proceeding, a deportation proceeding, people do have paid interpreters by the federal government. It is often difficult for them to find people with very rare languages. And I would say Swahili is not rare, but I have the most difficult time finding often a judge calling for a Swahili interpreter and them not being available. But yes, there are interpreters available for the process.
An argument that people on the right often use is that undocumented immigrants create an undue burden on the educational and healthcare systems. Can any of you address those issues?
Sure. The right to a public education is afforded to every person in our country under the age of 18. I mean, this was decided by the Supreme Court, right, in the 80s, that that status didn't does not matter for children that are in public education. And so talking about creating some sort of burden plays into those myths of job takers, of people that abuse the welfare state, right? When in fact, we know that unauthorized or undocumented or people with an unauthorized immigration status in this country do not qualify for the vast majority of public benefits in our country. That is just one of those myths that's perpetuated over and over. And as I pointed out earlier, there is an actual net positive when we talk not just on the economy, local economies, but there's a net positive of taxes that are going in by a group of people that will not have access to those resources. Undocumented folks, people that are working, that are paying into the system, will never have access to Social Security. So one of the biggest things that we need to talk about is that there's all these people, human beings, that are working, that are paying taxes, will never have access to those taxes that they're paying into the system. So we really have to inform ourselves, as I mentioned earlier, with facts, not anecdotes, but facts, and really look at the question and why it's being asked. Quite frankly, this is something that we've been talking about for at least 100 years. This cultural narrative that we've developed about that outsider, that immigrant, as being a burden on our society, not just on our economies, but also on our culture and our collective identity. We're seeing it more than ever today from the highest echelons of power in our country, and we really have to question why. Right? So I answered that question briefly in that manner because this is one of those myths, along with they are criminals, they are X's, that have been dealt with by social scientists, by academics, by politicians, by folks like you in this room that can see through the question and at the intent.
Sure.
I remember one of the most frustrating things was when we were working on in-state tuition, because we did win it back for 2 years, from 2009 to 2011. Youth Empowered in the Struggle, the youth arm of OSIS, was very critical in that. It was repealed in 2011 with Act 10 and all that. And I remember the politicians that spoke out against it and were saying that immigrant student is taking away a seat in the classroom from your kids. It was so frustrating because those were the exact same politicians that later voted to cut public school funding. So it's a distraction, it's divide and conquer strategy. And obviously we all benefit when we all have good access to good health care. We all benefit when we all have access to good education.
Speaking of healthcare, join us on the 4th of November for our healthcare forum. Commercial break here. What is a naturalized citizen?
So it's somebody who had a green card or has a green card and is going to apply to become a citizen. They have to pass an exam. A writing portion is included and a speaking portion is included. Well, speaking is the whole time, actually, because the interview's in English, unless you're eligible for a waiver. So it's a naturalized citizen is someone who had a green card first and then became a citizen. And that's why when we talk about a path to citizenship for people, we're talking about the ability to get a green card, not just become citizens, right? Although that does happen when you're born here. and hopefully that continues to happen. But a path to citizenship means you have the ability to apply for a green card and then naturalize through this naturalization process and the citizenship test that exists.
Thank you. What's the resistance to creating year-round visas for dairy workers and so forth? How can that be changed?
I mean, I know, like, I don't know if people are familiar, but there was recently a strike, too, in Monroe of cheesemakers that VOSIS has been supporting. And, oh, sorry, I was just saying that there was recently a strike in Monroe where some cheese workers went on strike. And I found it really interesting because the company that bought the smaller company, WW Dairy, and it was Dairy Farmers of America that bought it, there was an article about the strike because the workers resisted the E-Verify program, which is checks your kind of immigration status through different databases. It also makes a lot of errors, so it's not a perfect system. It certainly doesn't substitute immigration reform. But I found it interesting how, you know, they have been lobbying for years, and most recently have been lobbying for that Dignity Act to try to get visas. And I think the situation is going to get worse because they are definitely making an example of essential workers, right? Meatpacking, agricultural workers, immigrants are the ones who feed us, and that's who they're like making a show of going after, apart from other sectors. But I think the situation is going to get much more tense, whether it's a strike action or a de facto strike, in a sense where people just are too afraid, like in Los Angeles, to go to work. And what that's going to mean is that if you continue to lose workers and we don't get immigration reform, prices are going to go up. We're going to be importing more stuff. There will be less food. And they themselves, the dairy management, said, like, this strike is an example, this like dairy media thing, of the urgent need for immigration reform because we're going to face a food crisis. But the barrier has been the same, the stuff that I mentioned. And I think things are going to hit things are just going to get worse. And the problem is we have to draw the right conclusions, and we are going to have to come together and get the kind of reform we want. And that's really the goal. That's our goal. But I think the situation is going to get worse. So it's for all the reasons that I said. It's a very politicized issue. It's around the kind of immigration reform. It's been stuck in Congress for way too long.
May I add?
Sure.
So the last time we've had comprehensive immigration reform in our country was in 1986. So since 1986, there has been no comprehensive immigration reform that meets the need of our contemporary society. So we literally have people here that have been here since maybe 1987 who have lived out their lives, have families, have children, have grandchildren that haven't had an opportunity to adjust their immigration status. The worker argument also is often brought up. Why don't we create a temporary worker program, for example, for the dairy industry? And this is something that the dairy industry has long been pushing for, right? The expansion of the H-2 program. And the dairy industry is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So it doesn't qualify under the guidelines for temporary workers. There are increases in H-2 workers across the state, meaning farmers are bringing more and more workers under this temporary work permit than in the past. But it's something that the dairy industry doesn't qualify to have. I want to bring a couple of historical examples of what these guest workers are like, or permits are like. In our country, we had the Bracero program, which was a labor importation program that lasted from about 1942 to 1964, where about 5 million Mexican males, they were gendered programs, were brought into the country to work in mostly agriculture, right? So that went away in 64. We've had a number of different types of guest worker programs since, and this H2 program, there was a report that came out, I think about 2005, that called the H2 program as close to slavery, because there is a power dynamic there that really places the worker at the complete control of the employer. And it's something that when we have these types of questions, why not just expand this? We also have to understand that there is some questions of dignity, and what do you do with those folks that have been here for 20, 30 years, and tell them that you're temporary until death? I find that quite problematic.
Thank you all. It's almost time to be done here. Would you please put up the last slide, the one that talks about future programs, so people can make note of those? And we'll ask one last question. What is the best way to stay current on what ICE is actually doing in Dane County and how we can help?
I think one suggestion is that, we encourage people to become Voces de la Frontera members, and that helps us in different ways. One is that we make sure that you get information. We have about upcoming events and trainings, and it creates opportunities to be able to, for yourself or for others, to be part of this broader community defense network or get informed about different strikes, like the strike support that recently Voces was doing for workers in Monroe. That would be my main recommendation.
So yes, stay in touch with Voces. Definitely, they have a hotline where ICE is, you can report ICE sightings that are being verified by the trained verifiers. So staying in touch with Voces and their social media, Centro Hispano and their social media, where people will verify and share verified reports of ICE activity. It's so important to only share verified information. We don't want to create panic. We don't want people to not be able to feel like they can live their normal lives. We want to share verified information so they know how to make decisions for their family about, what to do next. And so I would follow those two social media accounts.
Before you leave tonight, go to the back tables, sign up with Voces, sign up with Silk, and you will be up to date on most of the activities that are taking place here in Madison and Dane County and statewide.
You're doing my job for me. I want to thank our speakers for sharing their time and knowledge with us during this very busy season, to the staff of First Unitarian Society for welcoming us, and to you, our audience, for your attention to this important issue. There are tables in the atrium with information from various organizations serving immigrants and refugees in Dane County. Thank you all for coming. We hope to see you soon at another League of Women Voters program. One other thing that I just thought of that I will answer is I took immigrant Know Your Rights training from an ACLU thing online. So you can look online, you can read various things there, and sign up with Voces to keep up with the current situation. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Gracias.